Oh yeah, getting ready.
Okay, right.
Little sweaty after.
Okay, hi guys. Welcome to our podcast regarding the question: how much importance has Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in MMA?
Switch over to
And first, I want to explain why why we are holding this in English, and that's very simple because English is the level playing field for all of us, since it's for all of us a second language. No? I think the argument would be very, very in favor of Felipe if we held it in Portuguese. Starting with Felipe, Felipe is our founder and head coach of the Gracie Berlin Academy. And he's a Gracie Humaita. If you don't know that, that's the original Gracie Academy in Rio, black belt. And he was 2014 the #1 ranked brown belt in all of Rio, of the state. Also, he is the 2018 German national champion in the black belt division at heavyweight and several other things, but just to give you an impression who you deal with. Jens is a former German champion in Kyokushinkai Karate, also a high school wrestler from America. And
here for South Carolina, actually.
Okay, so not exactly America.
Just did the session, so I'm still sweaty.
Yeah,
okay. Getting
he already was the wrestling and also stand-up coach for professional MMA fighters. Just to mention Rani and Attila, if you know the scene in Berlin or even in Germany, you're, I think, familiar with those names. To me, I'm the founder of the Fenriz gym and the head coach of the MMA section here. I'm kind of a pioneer of MMA in Germany since I was a professional from 2003 to 2006, just when it was about to be legal.
So you do the math, how old he is.
Yeah, exactly. I started at 10. No, just kidding. Yeah, I'm still competing.
I have a really good advantage in this field right here. I'm
young,
pretty good about myself.
Young blood.
Yeah. I'm still competing in Nogi grappling until today, and I'm also a sports scientist by education. And so you can see that we have 3 different views here on perspective on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. First, let's say Jiu-Jitsu in general, or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in general, is an integral part of the MMA game, and no MMA game would be complete without submission techniques, which is kind of Jiu-Jitsu. But on the other hand, if you only practice Jiu-Jitsu, you will probably not be able to defeat a high-level MMA fighter. So what we want to find out and discuss about is more or less how much Jiu-Jitsu is needed. Can Jiu-Jitsu be replaced? Can it be countered? And what's the limits of Jiu-Jitsu in MMA? I have noted a few questions for myself to discuss with the guys. And so let's start with the first one. How different and are gi and no gi styles of Jiu-Jitsu for MMA? And I would give the word to Felipe because he's the most expert in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from all of us.
Yeah, so this is a question that I get every time when we talk about gi and no gi. And I think overall, I think that no gi is better for attacks. Basically, when we talk about, because if you train no gi, it's way harder to get submissions. You have fewer options to control, and it's way harder to get armbar in the no gi since sweat is an important part of the no gi, and you don't have anywhere to grab. So if you manage to perform attacks in a good way in the no gi, that means that you have a good technique. And also for movement and scramble, it's a pretty big deal. Gi, I think it's better for your defense because since you have way more options to attack, if you know how to defend, it's probably not just because your arm slipped out or your leg is sweaty or something like that. It's because you really know the technique of escaping that specific position. And since it's a slower game in the gi, I think for the technique is also really beneficial because you'll have more time to think about the game. The no gi, especially if you guys watch ADCC, you see how people scramble a lot more. It's a way faster game. So I think I like when I have the courses here. You guys can check the schedule. It's pretty balanced. I try to keep gi and no gi in a balanced way because I think it's important for both. For MMA, I would say that it's difficult because when we talk about jiu-jitsu for MMA, it becomes a more it's focused on some specific aspects. So a lot of the stuff that we train in the gi are not actually going to apply for MMA because gi revolves a lot on grips. So you're not going to see anyone playing a spider guard in an MMA fight. But considering that, like, all the benefits from training gi, I think that the gi is very beneficial for anyone to learn jiu-jitsu. If you're preparing for a specific MMA fight, maybe I would say that focusing the no gi is a better solution. But to learn jiu-jitsu overall, I think that the gi is very important. So you see, like, for example, Demian Maia, when he's not preparing for a fight, he trains gi and no gi. But when he focuses on a fight, then he goes specifically to the no gi. So I think that it is important overall, but if you're focused on one thing, I think that the no-gi specifically for MMA would make more sense.
Yeah. If I may say, but if you practice gi jiu-jitsu a lot, you also develop a habit of way more fighting from below the opponent, like from half guard and guard stuff, and also to look for things to lock the opponent down and be quite, as you say, slower in the approach of the submission, which I compete at Nogi almost solely, and still in the Masters division, and the people have lots of experience there, but most cases I can distinguish between regular no gi fighters and more like gi fighters just by the positioning they try to achieve, and many positions from gi jiu-jitsu, in my opinion, expose your head, at least if you're talking international rules, to elbow strikes or stuff.
It's going to depend. I mean, it's also because when we talk about gi, like, people think about the grips a lot, but it's going to depend a lot on the style of the fighter. For example, you see a guy like Rodolfo Vieira, who is doing pretty well in MMA. He's undefeated.
He's a good wrestler.
Yeah. And he was always someone who was really good. Actually, he had a really good judo.
Yeah, and wrestling as well. Definitely.
And he developed his wrestling a lot.
Yeah. You can see the double leg takedowns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, like, he fought most of his career in the gi, but he had always his stand-up game really sharp. He was always with a really strong pressure from the top, which was his signature thing, and so he could apply that very well to MMA. And you see a guy like, for example, Marcelo Garcia, who was a guy who was playing a lot from the bottom, from the guard. He's one of the best in jiu-jitsu of all time, but he couldn't make this transition to MMA so well. He had a really hard time because styles. So and he is awesome in the no-gi. Like, he won the ADCC, so it is the guy who is basically one of the best no-gi fighters in the world, but he couldn't make that transition quite well. So I don't know. I mean, it depends a lot on styles. For example, I like to play half guard, which doesn't make me rely so much on grips. I like the grips, but I don't need them so much.
Yeah.
So normally I fight gi and no gi the same way, which for when I fight no gi, I see a lot of people missing the grips Whereas
Yeah.
for me,
Yeah.
it's just okay. So this is always going to be the case. But if I was fighting the MMA, playing half guard,
No.
it wouldn't be
Yeah.
such a good idea.
Yeah.
So,
Especially if you're a wrestler and leg turk you.
So
and then,
you think it's more up to the individual style than
Yeah.
to gi and no gi?
yeah, I think so.
It could be compared a little bit to wrestling as well. So if you do wrestling for MMA, I still encourage everybody to wrestle with their shoes on, because to get the grip, to get the feeling right for doing the shots, especially in Germany or in Europe, you will not have wrestling mats where the guys usually train MMA on. You will have judo mats, so you will have all those mat burns. You will mess up your technique doing it wrong because you don't want to get the mat burns. That's one part. But on the other hand, it's kind of similar to the gi part, is the defense, when you leg defense. When somebody gets your leg up or gets your legs in between, single leg attacks. So if you're able to just slip out because you don't have any shoes on, so all those, it's way easier to limp leg out. Single leg, it's very hard to grab a single leg if somebody doesn't have the shoes on. He can limp leg out pretty easily or during the transition. So it's kind of similar. So I would always encourage you to do both at the end. Because learn the defense right, learn the defense in wrestling, learn the defense right for getting out with your shoes on. Then you will definitely be able to get your leg out during an MMA match. But also learn the technique. Use the sweaty leg.
Yeah.
Use it. You limp leg your ass off if you can. Just if you see a fight, one more thing. For that thing, see a fight. Then Cormier, when he has a single leg, he will take you down. And he had a single leg with John Jones, and he was limp legging out of there like nothing, just because he was sweaty. He was doing it like he's supposed to for MMA.
Talking about wrestling, I think we can all agree that wrestling is also one of the essential pillars of MMA. How much, in your opinion, is wrestling able to cancel out or counter jiu-jitsu in the takedown game?
Oh, completely. I think at the moment, completely. Because it's hard in MMA. I would say if you take an ADCC fight, people would, and if you take there's one example right now, Nicky at the heavyweights. Yeah, he was an okay wrestler in college, I think, not Division 1, Division 2 or 3, but still tough as nails. And I think if he gets a grip on you, he will choke the shit out of you anyhow once he has you on the ground. So, but you can see people actually playing guard with him. So in an ADCC, which is fine, people will just drop down. Even guys who are you would usually see wrestling in ADCC, they don't play the wrestling game with him. They just get down and play guard. In MMA, it's hard to do. I think the only guy I see doing it recently is Damian Maia, who has a good guard game.
Yeah,
Still, he goes for the single leg a lot.
And he gets beat by. The last guy he beat was a really good wrestler, Ben Askren. So that used to be one of the best wrestlers in MMA. Mm-hmm. So he beat him, but he didn't beat him wrestling. He beat him, letting him take him down, and then on the ground took care of him. Yeah. But once he's not able to take somebody down, and that's what his problem is. You see some fights against Colby Covington against and some other guys where he really had trouble taking the guys down, and he was getting beaten up standing.
It was but this is the
or
thing.
Rory McDonald, you couldn't even get the single leg takedowns going. So you need to, in my opinion, you need to have maybe not the defense as a BJJ guy, because you don't care if you get taken down or not. If your BJJ is world class, let him take you down.
Yeah, but in MMA,
but you need to be able to take down somebody on your own as well.
In MMA, this changes a lot, because like even if you see like high level guys in MMA, I mean, they're not looking forward to play guard.
No.
Because like if you have a guy who knows how to pin you down and punch you, it's going to be complicated.
And that's one thing maybe European wrestlers are not really keen about or not really looking for it. But it's a different styles of wrestling. And European wrestlers who do freestyle wrestling for the Worlds or Olympics, it's a different wrestling system that you do in the States, a folk style wrestling that you do in high school and that you do in college. Especially in college, you get points for every minute that you keep somebody on the floor. You will not get stand up like you will do in a freestyle wrestling match. In a freestyle wrestling match, they will stand you up after I think 15 or 20 seconds, and you only do those turning. In a wrestling match in high school and in college you will get points. In high school, we just will not just get stand up. So what you need to do is you need to be able to get up on your own, or you will have a guy riding you out the whole entire match. So that's really what they train at the college level and the high school level. They train how to ride you out from top. So the top control from a college D1 Division 1 wrestler is always going to be really hard to defend from the floor, and so really hard to get up.
Yeah. The point I was talking about is the Achilles tendon of jiu-jitsu and MMA the takedown game. Because if you see the pillars, if you see the striking, the wrestling, and the jiu-jitsu, you always have to make the transition. Just left the striking left out, even if there's not the striking. But if you have those three pillars, and if you have somebody who trains solely jiu-jitsu, will he be able to take somebody down who knows how to wrestle, how to defend the takedown?
If takedowns is a big part of jiu-jitsu as well.
Of course, I know.
But it's gotten a bigger
why
part as well, didn't
that's
it?
why I'm
It
talking
used
about
to be,
this.
but I see people now training.
But
more.
if you have, for example, like, because in MMA, a lot of situations, and I'm curious to see, for example, you were talking about the fight between Colby Covington and Demian Maia.
Yeah.
And it was a fight that I think the first round, Demian Maia beat Colby Covington with
Standing
punches.
up, with punches, yeah.
Which was like, you don't see that happening so much. So it's a very dynamic situation, especially when you, for example, I was very skeptical about that fight between Demian Maia and Ben Askren, because I thought that neither of them was going to go to the ground, and they were just exchange strikes, and I was like, man, I don't want to watch those two exchange strikes.
But then I knew that Ben Askren never did really take care of his boxing, because I saw an interview. If you see him fight, there's no boxing at all.
Yeah.
And if you see interviews with him, he's always saying that he never really tried with boxing. He just tried to get the guys on the floor as fast as he can, and then punch him out.
Exactly.
And
Damian
can box better than Ben Askren, and that's why I was keen to see what happens if he tries to take Damian down. And that's what happened. He choked him out.
Damian is a very good example for somebody who perfectly adapted to MMA. When he saw, first he had success with his jiu-jitsu, because his jiu-jitsu was so high level that people just couldn't deal with it. Then people adapted. So first the level of competition got higher, but also people adapted to him. They were especially training for him when they had to fight him. But Damian was, as soon as he felt like, okay, my game is not working out anymore, he adapted very quickly. Within like half a year or something, within 1 or 2 fights, you could see an increase in his striking abilities that was astonishing. Which brings me to another question, where BJJ or Jiu-Jitsu is, from my perspective as a sports scientist, very, very good tool to have if you want to take MMA on. If you're a striker, your ability to coordinate your body is way more limited than as a jiu-jitsu fighter. And I saw that several times, but I don't remember any any counter example. I saw it many times that Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighters who really committed themselves to MMA were very quickly developing a very good, especially fist striking game, punching game, and good leg work. But I never saw a pure striker adapt within 1 or 2 years to become a really good ground fighter.
We were talking about that before. This is, I think that for MMA, having a grappling background is essential. Especially nowadays, it's easier to develop a striking game than it is to develop a grappling game, I believe. Like in the first question, like we were talking about the fight, if a jiu-jitsu guy could take a wrestling guy down. I think that in a wrestling match or a jiu-jitsu match, I highly doubt it. MMA is difficult because it's so dynamic. You know, depending on how good, like you're saying now, depending on how good you develop your striking, you can create a lot of openings that you might take the wrestler in a bad position. Like, for example, you see Jacaré, Ronaldo Souza.
It's a good takedown game now.
He's a really good boxer now, and you can see that he mixes his boxing with his
Yeah,
takedowns really well.
Of course.
So depending on how you set up your, for example, Rick Story, he was a good wrestler,
Yeah,
right?
he was okay.
And Demian Maia took him down
Yeah.
because Demian Maia knew how to set up this with strikes.
But that's the point. That's the point. He perfectly adapted to MMA.
Yeah, but I think
Right.
there's one difference. It's the level of guys wrestling in MMA. So there's the Rick Story and there's a Tyron Woodley. Tyron Woodley fight was after Rick
Oh,
Story.
yes.
You will not take
Oh,
Tyron Woodley
yes.
down if you
Oh,
don't know how to wrestle. Those big tree trunks of legs and those hips, that guy know how to wrestle.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he was
What
wrestling
was
with
that,
Ben
like
Askren at Missouri.
24 or 26 attempted takedowns by Demian Maia
Probably around
and
that, yeah.
zero success.
So that's
And you could see him getting tired round by round.
and this depends on really on the wrestling background, yeah. And sometimes it depends on the guy who's the BJJ guy on the wrestling he's doing. You have the Gracie son who's now in the UFC.
Kron.
Kron, yeah, he was doing good at the beginning. I think the first 2 fights, and then he fought. I forgot who he fought, but he couldn't.
Cub Swanson.
Yeah, and he couldn't get
Oh, yeah.
no take. And Cub
Yeah,
Swanson is not a really good wrestler in the sense of wrestling.
And that's
But he
it.
couldn't
That's
get
it.
any takedowns going, and he was getting mixed up on standing up. He got beat
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
But he couldn't. But he had no takedown game.
So
And
this
that's
is
really-
one of my biggest pet peeves
Yeah.
when I'm watching a UFC MMA match, for that matter. Like, Kron is a really good jiu-jitsu fighter.
wonderful fighter in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
But in a Cub Swanson fight, it's not that he didn't got in takedowns. He
Didn't
didn't
even
try.
Yeah, but because he's not confident in it, I think.
Man, I don't know, man. It's like I think, and this is an issue that I see with a lot of jiu-jitsu fighters, because the thing that you're saying, that they develop a really good striking game,
I think.
and they think that they're strikers,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
want to prove that they can
Oh,
knock
yeah.
somebody
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
And I say this a good example. I don't like to talk bad about people, but I remember when Gabriel Gonzaga got that
Yeah.
high kick on
Yeah.
Krokov.
Yeah, I remember.
He quit jiu-jitsu from that kick. He
Yeah,
quit
Yeah, he
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
He actually
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
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 and he had some
yeah,
good
yeah.
low kicks as well,
Yeah,
so he
yeah.
started only kicking.
This was
Yeah,
a
that's true.
two-time world champion in a black
Yeah,
belt
that's
Yeah.
true.
who stopped trying jiu-jitsu and MMA.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, man, look,
Why?
good.
Yeah,
that
I never
you're-
understood that. I think that was a stupid move. But
And Kron was the same. And in the third round, Kron was trying to pull guard. And I was like, and this is, like you said, Cub Swanson is not that difficult to take down. It's not. He
I
doesn't
don't
have a
think
really
so.
good.
I think Cap Swanson is not that good a wrestler, but I think Cap Swanson is so hard to predict. He's
Mm.
fighting every fight differently.
Yeah, Cub Swanson's just a hard ass fighter. I think that's
Yeah.
what he really is.
He's very adaptive.
That's true.
He's very adaptive, and once he figured his opponent out, he will give him a bad riddle to
Yeah, but
solve.
getting back to your actually question is for me, and it's not really bashing BJJ. You know, I like to make fun of you all the time on BJJ because
We're
actually,
yes.
let me put it that way. So I'm fine with it saying that BJJ is really the mother sport of MMA. So without BJJ, without the Gracie family, you would have no MMA, no UFC, no nothing.
Yeah,
That's what I think, and that's what really brought up. But actually, if BJJ is the mother, let me tell you right now, wrestling is the father. So you really got destroyed. That's what my opinion is. In the last couple of years, or in the last 4 to 5, 6 years, really wrestling really took over in MMA. And that's not only because of the level. I think it's one thing is the level of guys wrestling in MMA and the level of BJJ guys in MMA. And the top BJJ guys are not in wrestling. As of some of the top wrestlers from college, actually, they directly after college they go into MMA career. Some of them, yeah. Then you have somebody like Cejudo, who was an Olympic champion, but he was quite young as an Olympic champion already, starting MMA at a young age. So I think there is maybe not comparable as much because usually the really good BJJ guys like Rodolfo Vieira, for example, who is a good wrestler as well, but still I would consider him as a BJJ guy at first, definitely. He will be there with the top guys, but he's actually kind of old for starting a career in MMA now.
I don't know. He's 31.
Yeah, but you have the college wrestlers coming at 24, 25 at the most.
Yeah,
And they're really into after a college career where you have those, I don't know, 300, 400 wrestling matches. If you had a good career, maybe with the high school together, that's really a big advantage of
Well,
taking somebody down, defending the takedowns, having conditioning. That's really maybe a vital part now that's taking over. And I'm not sure, and maybe some wrestler will bash me for that. I'm not sure if it's wrestling technique in itself or if it's just the way of training, the way of toughness, and then comes the takedown and defense. which
Yeah.
you do nothing else for your whole life.
I think that there's some stuff that is important to think, because when people think about jiu-jitsu, they think about submissions,
Only, yeah, that's true.
and that's a common mistake, because like when we talk about jiu-jitsu, we're not simply talking about arm bars and chokes and stuff. We're talking about learning how, understanding how to get out of someone's top position. For example, if you're in somebody's guard, like for example, in MMA, you don't want to be.
As well. Yeah,
Yeah, you don't want to be like on the bottom. So if you have close guard, to know how to stand up from that position, or to maintain position. For example, I remember like when Johan fought, and people were like, yeah, he beat him with punches. It was like, yeah, but he had
positioning.
He had
Exactly.
the back.
Exactly.
And he let him go just because I was bashing on the fight before that he choked somebody out.
He had the back. That's
he was moving there with jiu-jitsu.
So I think it's a wider area. When talk about this that you said about the college wrestlers, this is interesting, because I don't know how the career of a wrestler works in the U.S. You have, like, for example, in jiu-jitsu right now, it's a really mainstream sport, and the thing with wrestling is that normally people they practice wrestling for competition. Like the guy is who get good at wrestling, they're there to enter the national team and make it to the Olympics and stuff like that.
That's the pinnacle. But usually you have like you will start off and usually in the States, like now it shifts a little bit, but usually in the States you would have started off at something around 10 years. Now it's 5 years. You have more youth tournaments than you probably had back in the days when I started wrestling in the States. But you will have your high school career where you do one season. That was back in the 90s. I think now they're doing freestyle wrestling after they're doing the high school season. So you will have a whole year of wrestling. Usually during high school, you would only have 4 to 5 months of wrestling during the season. And then you would just do other sports. Yeah, like Rude, for example, I think he was at three sports that he was doing. I think he was doing baseball, and no, that was Ferguson, who was doing baseball, football, and wrestling. So you do all of them. And then in college, you would either just do wrestling and then now freestyle and college season as well. College season now is about 5 to 6 months if you make it to the end, to the NCAA finals. And you basically do nothing else but wrestle. And even during your free time, you're gonna try out the best wrestlers at least. If you look at the best wrestlers right now that are still in college, Carl Snyder, for example, he's doing 2 turns. He's people forget about this. So he's winning the national championships in college wrestling with a different rule set, and he's going to the Olympics in the same year and winning the Olympics in a freestyle wrestling scenario. Then he's going back to college wrestling in a higher weight class than he is in freestyle. In freestyle, he's wrestling at 92 kilos. Yeah? In college, he's wrestling at the open weight class, or at least it's 200 and I think it's 245 pounds. 245 or 265 pounds. I looked that up, but it's heavyweight open weight class.
110 kilos.
So and he's usually in there in between 100 kilos and 105 kilos that he's wrestling the bigger guys. So he's doing this. I heard that he's doing this because a friend of his is wrestling his weight class he's out of college now, but it was wrestling in his weight class. And then he's going back to college and back. So he's jumping all those seasons. So he's doing nothing else but wrestling. So that's something. If you get a guy like this to an MMA circuit, I highly doubt that there will people be able to really get his work rate. Yeah, I think the work rate in a regular wrestler guy in a regular wrestling room. You go in a regular wrestling room, you will have more toughness, more working, dedicated people. I'm not saying that all of them are, but the average guy will probably be more of a tougher worker than a BJJ guy, just because I think it's getting more mainstream. Wrestling is not a mainstream sport, as you said.
Yeah, but this is what I mean, because like jiu-jitsu became really popular, and you don't have like jiu-jitsu became the sport. For example, for a lot of people who work, they go to train afterwards to relax and stuff. So it became a really mainstream sport in that area. So you have the competitors. But since it became so mainstream, what happens is you have a lot of tournaments, and there are people in terms of money, and I know this because I talk to a lot of high-level guys, and they say that they choose not to go to MMA because of money, because they can make a really good living just by competing in
They
jiu-jitsu.
will not do that in college wrestling because you're not allowed to make the money that's used to the amateur
Exactly.
status, and you
Yeah,
will not allowed to make any money. I think they're now allowing them to make money over the social networks. They were not even allowed to make money over social networks. But just for comparison, you're saying tournaments during a wrestling season. During my high school wrestling season, I would always have at least two. I would have a dual meet during the week on a Wednesday, and then on a Saturday, we would always use to have a tournament. So I would always have at least two fights. And if I would go on, qualify over the tournaments, I would then fight for more fights in the tournaments. But in high school, you will have two meets or two dual meets, means that you fight against another high school. You have those dual meets. It's usually a high school against high school. And then on the weekends, you have the tournaments. So that's even more, and everybody's trying to get on the team. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
During your high school, in my high school, I was fighting 171 pounds. At least always three guys with me. So we were four guys at 171 pounds who were trying to make the team. So you don't have this dual meet on Wednesday only where you fight, and you don't only have the tournament on the weekend. You're actually fighting every day for a spot on the team. So you have a tournament so you have this tournament, or you have the qualification rounds, whatever. You have this every day in the gym. And I think that's what sets wrestling mentality. If you get drilled like this from a child age, that sets only the mentality. I'm not saying it's always that good, but that sets apart from other sports, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Just like completing this. So it's just I think right now, since jiu-jitsu guys have so many opportunities to just make money by fighting in jiu-jitsu, even like for example the tournaments that don't pay any money to the winners, they make a name for themselves, and they can live out of seminars because I mean there's a lot of gyms around the world where they can travel to and just make a lot of money. Or there are a lot of events, since it's mainstream, there are a lot of people paying to watch jiu-jitsu matches. So jiu-jitsu guys, so you see a lot of great guys who only compete in jiu-jitsu. Remember that guy that you saw the picture, like was here for a seminar, Muhammad Ali? Man, yeah.
But he's wrestling in the States as well.
Yeah, but this is the thing. He trains
to.
wrestling because I think I train wrestling as well because it's very beneficial.
I know you coach quite well.
For jiu-jitsu, but he was talking to me. It was like he was training with Minotauro Nogueira.
Oh, okay.
And he was being like driven to the MMA, and he chose not to. He's like, no, I think jiu-jitsu is a better path.
In the jiu-jitsu scene.
But I think the high-level guys who took the path to MMA, I mean, if you look at them, they've done pretty well. I mean, you have Verdun, who was MMA, he was UFC champion.
Yeah, but did he won he won the championship belt with BJJ. That's clear because he choked out Cain Velasquez with a sloppy ass double leg because he was already tired. So you can have that point that BJJ won that one match.
That's arguable.
That's that one match that BJJ won. I will give you that. But in all seriousness, do you think that Verdun won most of his heavyweight championships by BJJ? I think the only match that he really won with BJJ was that one where the Velasquez was already out of totally. He was only in an automatic control there, and the guy. And the funny thing is, he won it against Gonzaga, didn't he?
Didn't he?
Yeah, and that was BJJ as well. And Nogueira.
Didn't he?
Only against the BJJ guys.
Yeah, he trying with Fedor.
Yeah,
with jiu-jitsu.
So don't even start that with me.
Yeah,
he tried.
Yeah, he did, and he was the first one.
In the end, you can hardly argue that he wins a lot of.
Well, we can go on and on. For example, Murilo Bustamante won the UFC title against Matt Lindeland, and he choked him twice in that same fight.
Yeah,
and
but he was how long was he out because of juicing? 3 years, 4 years? I don't know. That BJJ thing right there, I don't know.
I
think Fedor never
juice. From that standpoint, the wrestlers
never juice at all. What's wrong with you?
Shouldn't throw a stone.
Never take anything. No, actually, seriously. Seriously. But seriously, during college season and during high school season, even in high school, it is almost impossible to juice up in wrestling, especially in college.
Okay.
Those NCAA rule sets. They're controlling you. There's so much, and not only the guys from the athletic commissions and USADA. That's one thing, but the college itself, because it will take so much
prestige.
Prestige out of you and money. Colleges are making money. Penn State, for example, they're ruling the college scene right now. They're
Yeah.
making so much money out of commercials with Nike, and it's the college who getting all the money.
Yeah.
And if those guys, if they're gonna find out that one of them is juiced up, it's
Yeah,
gonna
well,
be. That's so.
I think.
I mean, on the freestyle level, looking at some of
Yeah.
the, especially the East Block guys, some of them,
Yeah. But
crazy.
sorry to interrupt this, but
Yep.
I think the whole juice thing in MMA, wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, whatever, would make a great whole podcast.
Yeah,
But it's
definitely.
not
That's
what
good in
we,
there, yeah.
it's not what we should.
I'm just saying, Verdum just won because
It's
That's
not
not
what we
true.
should
No, it's
go
not.
on about today. Because obviously it's also in MMA already a thing because the one or the other guy got caught and
It's always going to be a
I
thing.
wonder how many guys really seriously after he beat Fedor with his triangle. I wonder how much bashing emails, murder calls, whatever he got, death threats, whatever he got after he beat. I think for a lot of people he killed the hero. At least for me, he did.
Man,
I mean-
I gotta be honest. I was celebrating.
Yeah, hell yeah, everybody was BJJ.
I think, yeah,
Because look at Nogueira. I think
that was a huge
Nogueira
victory
tried as
for
well, and he couldn't.
everybody who just was ever into BJJ.
Yeah, but
matter
yeah,
what.
if you look at the like big names, like if you check the Brazilians in MMA
yeah.
as a whole, most of them were good in jiu-jitsu as well. So if
Yeah,
even
sure.
if
Yeah.
they were champions, like
Yeah.
Nogueira was interim champion, so
But,
I don't think it was.
Sorry,
Wasn't he? I
to,
think he was.
sorry to stop you guys in your tracks, but as you see that we are now getting more and more off topic, because more interesting new aspects are coming up, and we already are way over the time we agreed on.
All right.
I would think that for first podcast, we will leave it at that, and we will derive the second podcast from
Sure, we should, yeah.
what just came up here. And a very warm goodbye, not welcome this time. A very warm goodbye from me, Ulf, from
Yeah.
Jens,
Bye bye, everybody. Have a good
who
night.
doesn't remember his name, and from
Felipe,
And
thanks
from
everyone
Felipe.
for tuning in, guys. Really
Yeah, hope you
appreciate
enjoyed it a bit.
being together with you.
Don't drop any comments.
yeah, don't you dare. Maybe
You
that
can drop
works.
the comments.
Don't you dare. Don't you dare drop any comment. Wait.
Maybe you have
Oh,
an idea.
there's a
also-
comment.
Maybe you have an idea for a next podcast as well.
All right.
So what is it?
Yeah.
Let me read
So-
it. I want to read it.
And we stop right here.
Oh
before
no,
it
we still got the
escalates.
Verdun versus Fedor also. No, I can't. Yeah, surreal. Hope you're not training in our gym.